Atamari e te whānau, kia ora. Haven't been on here for a while. I'll just wait a little while until a few people join. But I've been missing in action off here for I think nearly a month now, and in that time I've just been moving whare and moving houses, and so I know I'm settled in and back, so it'd be nice to be back in this space. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Irene. I live in Tāmaki and in Auckland, New Zealand, and I'm connected to Te Ope Whakaora, the Salvation Army, just shout out to Karakia 7 a.m, 7 p.m, the platform that this is streaming from, and to all the whānau over in Australia and America that are streaming and are watching. For us this week in Aotearoa, it's a significant week, Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, and so you've probably heard a lot of sharing this week about our journey in Aotearoa to be able to make Māori language an official language of New Zealand and all the different things that went into that. So I'm going to share a little bit as well. So, morena Marianne. So maybe I'll start with karakia first, and then I'll do a bit of sharing. So me noi tātou, e tō mātou matu i te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tai mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki rungi te whenua, kia rita anō ki tō te rangi, ho mai kia mātou ai nei he taroma mātou mō tēnei rā. Murua mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muri nei i o te hunga e harana kia mātou. Hau hoki mātou e kawea kia whakawaia, engari whakoorangi a mātou te kino. Nau hoki te rangatiratanga te kaha me te gloria. Ake, āmene. So, for those of you who aren't Māori or haven't really heard Te Reo Māori, Te Reo Māori is the language of the Indigenous people, of my people in New Zealand, and so that karakia that I just spoke is actually the Lord's Prayer in Te Reo Māori. So so I just thought I'd share a bit about Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, and the steps that we've taken as a nation to get to the point where it's quite common for us to be able to speak Te Reo Māori, where once 50 years ago it actually wasn't common, and it was actually uncommon. Only 20% of Māori people could still speak Te Reo Māori. So I'm just going to share a slideshow so that you can see. There we go. I only just learned how to do this today, by the way. Whānau, so if I make a mistake, sorry about it. I'm not that good with technology, but I managed to get it in there, so I'm pretty impressed with myself. Okay, so anyway, here we go. This is, I'll just turn my phone down, sorry, whānau. Okay, so 50 years ago, well, actually, let's go back to 1840. After the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the colonial government started using policy and as a way of colonising and assimilating Māori into Western ways of life, and an intentional assimilation tactic that was used not just here but in other nations as well was to restrict the Indigenous language. So in Aotearoa is restricting Māori language, used by way of policy, using our education system as a tool, which often used physical punishment to deter Te Reo Māori. So displacement, marginalisation, land loss, and the urban drift meant that by the 1960s, only 20% of Māori could still speak Te Reo Māori. So the New Zealand government at that time realised that they needed to do something, and or else the language would just be lost. So there were groups at that time. You might have seen on the news if you're in New Zealand that there was a group called Ngā Tamatoa, which was a group of young people who were just university students. And, so when you think about that age bracket, it's like 18 to 23-year-olds and other people in the community, other young people that came together and started a petition. So yesterday was the 14th of September, and 50 years ago, yesterday, they presented that petition to the steps of Parliament. And so it's a really significant year, and yesterday in particular was really significant. And so through that, they introduced Māori Language Day, which the Ministry of Education extended to a week. And so their protest and advocacy eventually led to an inquiry that established the Waitangi Tribunal in 1975. And I just want to share this next slide with you to kind of give you an idea of the context we were living in at that time our country was in regards to notions of culture. So here we go. And it might seem quite shocking if you've never seen anything like this before, but the idea of our plain duty as good, compassionate colonialists is to smooth down their dying pillow, to establish government control by phasing out as humanely as possible the cultural basis of Māori society. So that was the ideology of the government not long after the signing of Te Reo Waitangi, actually. So that was meant to be a covenant of partnership, but that statement shows that that wasn't actually the spirit in which the government at that time and further on decided that they wanted to hold on to that. So in 1985, the Waitangi Tribunal saw a Te Reo claim, and it said that the reo was a taonga, and that the Crown, the government, was obliged to protect it according to Te Reo Waitangi. And so the tribunal said the guarantee in the treaty requires affirmative action to protect and sustain the language, not a passive obligation to tolerate its existence. That's a pretty powerful statement right there. The tribunal said the guarantee in the treaty requires affirmative action to protect and sustain the language, not a passive obligation to tolerate its existence. So when you think about that, it's really, these are the things of our history. And I know for a lot of people who don't know this stuff, it can be really confronting and make us really hold the mirror up to ourselves to see, what's actually going on under the surface. But without knowing some of the stuff, it's hard to understand where we've come from and how far we've actually come. So even though this is the idea that they had back then, when you think about where we are now, we've come a long way. Still got a long way to go, but we've come a long way. And so here we go. We have, through that as well, we've had the establishment of Te Taura Whiri, which is the Māori Language Commission, and then the Ministry of Māori Development, which is Te Puni Kōkiri. So a whole lot of really cool things have happened just from that little bit of advocacy. Well, it wasn't a little bit, it was actually really significant, of a group of young people back in 1972. And then that's gone on to provide a whole lot more ratification of policy and different things to support our reo, so in broadcasting, Māori television, and in our education system. So for, in our education system, there was the establishment of Kohangareri, and Kohangareri in particular has been a massive vehicle for our reo. It's been a massive way that we have been able to, in Aotearoa, carry the reo and for it to come through our young people. But there has been a bit of controversy around the way that the government has treated kohanga reo, because it's been measured against mainstream early childhood education, and the pedagogy is different. The reasons for their existence are different. So I guess currently they're in negotiations around that, and I'm really glad about that, because when we think about the purpose of Kohanga Reo was to revitalise Te Reo Māori, and for Māori to actually be able to guide how that would go according to, you know, what the Tiratia Waitangi says. It shouldn't be measured against mainstream ideas of childcare, of what, you know, mainstream ideas of childcare is not the same as revitalising Te Reo Māori. So eventually I think that things are going to change, and it's still going through the process as far as I understand. And there was a Waitangi claim as well that was put into the Waitangi Tribunal around the Kohanga Reo, and this is Se Timoti Karetu has been a massive supporter of Te Reo Māori, not just an advocate, a waymaker really. He's been leading out with colleagues of his and others in revitalising Te Reo Māori. And so with the Waitangi claim, the Crown accepted that it had obligations to the language, but they didn't really see that kohanga reo were taonga, as the Kohanga Reo movement was trying to help them understand that we are actually a taonga. We are a taonga. We are holding a taonga. And in the end, the tribunal found that even though Kohanga Reo might not be seen as a taonga themselves, Kohanga Reo are an essential vehicle for the transmission of taonga and for the exercise of rangatiratanga over it. So in the end, the Waitangi Tribunal actually supported the whole the claim of the Kohanga Reo movement, and so now they are going through changing the legislation for Kohanga Reo and how it's funded and how it's run to align more authentically with Māori ways of doing and being, which again is a positive thing, because in the past, if you go back to that first comment on slide 2, where they assumed to know what was best for Māori and that the best way was to just phase out the culture, we know that that wasn't the right way to go. We know that they didn't have the right thoughts around how to help Māori. It was more about being able to just assimilate. But we are different. Our reo makes us different. It helps us with our identity and all of those things. So I'll just skip over these ones to get to here. So this again is Se Timoti Karetu, and in terms of Te Reo Māori in our schooling system, like a lot of people would love for there to be compulsory reo in our schools, and I would like there to be compulsory reo in our schools, but Se Timoti acknowledges that we just don't have enough competent teachers, speakers of Te Reo Māori to resource that dream, I guess. So he believes that learning the history instead will be able to give people the heart to go and look after the reo and treat it like the taonga it is, for him and for others as well. He doesn't want those limited resources to get wasted by people who really don't understand at this current time how precious the reo is. And he also thinks that learning our history teaches the public and the rest of Aotearoa that Te Reo is a government and national responsibility and doesn't just belong to Māori, isn't just the responsibility of Māori people, given the history and the intentional way that it was suppressed. It is the responsibility of us as a nation to protect those things that are precious to us and give us our unique identity. So you won't find Te Reo Māori anywhere else in the world. And we celebrate a range of beautiful languages here in New Zealand and acknowledge them. But you can actually go to those other countries and you can still hear that reo spoken. You can still hear that language spoken. You can go to Samoa, you can hear Samoan. You can go to Germany, you can hear German. You can go to France, you can hear French. And in Aotearoa, we need to be able to hear Te Reo Māori. Okay. So the Human Rights Commission, I think for me as someone who is part of the Salvation Army, we really believe in human rights. And I think that goes for lots of other churches and groups as well, that human rights are, they're just the basis. They should be the basis of our society. But there are different ideas of what those are. And these are what the Human Rights Commission, this is what the Human Rights Commission says about Te Reo Māori. So, yeah, it's really just to encourage greater Māori participation nationally, to protect and promote te reo and tikanga Māori in a manner consistent with Māori cultural aspirations and preferences, and the practices of organisations to support iwi initiatives that address iwi needs. So it's really to be guided by Māori, because I think that while we want to do better, a lot of the time we just don't know necessarily how to do better. So being able to have Māori around you to help guide that process is really, really important. So the Human Rights Commission are pretty awesome. I like their whakaaro, their thoughts around this. And so just wanted to really kōrero about this. Mike McRoberts the other night, he spoke about his the impacts of not having te reo, not having his language as a Māori person. And this is common for a lot of our whānau, a lot of our Māori whānau who haven't been able to learn te reo, and how impactful it has been for them growing up not knowing te reo, and how that affects them, and how they often get perceived or feel they are seen because of that lack of knowledge of te reo Māori. And so that you might hear of something called intergenerational trauma. Well, there's been a lot of things like around te reo Māori that has caused intergenerational trauma, like our grandparents getting hit at school for speaking te reo and those kind of things. But one of the common modern day impacts of the suppression of te reo Māori is the shame that our Māori whānau feel at not being able to speak te reo Māori, and how that is just so closely linked to identity. And I know it's common for non-Māori to feel a little bit embarrassed when you get words wrong and you might mispronounce them, and so people don't want to say words, but it's a little bit different when it's actually so intrinsically linked and embedded into who you are as a person. So some of the narratives and kōrero that come out, or that I've been able to hear in my work and working alongside Māori whānau and talking to them about te reo Māori and their learning journey, this is common. And it's even there's even been times when I've felt that way as well. And so I just think it's really important to be mindful about how it's impacting today as well, continues to impact us today. So this here is Sir James Hinari, And he was part of the Waitangi Tribunal claim in 1985 around Te Reo Māori. And he said that Te Reo Māori, the language, is the life force of the mana Māori. The word is the life force of the language. These two ideas are absolutely crucial to the Māori language. And what he's saying is that, that understanding, cultural understanding, all of those ways of doing and being are linked into our words, into the kupu, into the ideas that create those words. So a lot of the time, a word isn't just a word, it is a whole idea. It is a whole, there is a whole lot of meaning in one word. And so to not understand the reo, the language, is to not be able to understand the intricacies and the hidden meanings within the words. So yeah, I encourage you all to learn a little bit of Te Reo Māori and start to understand those hidden things that you just don't understand unless you dig a little bit deeper into the words, which are really beautiful. Like words like manaakitanga, for example. People often think it just means hospitality, but it has so much of a deeper meaning to it, which is to uphold someone's mana, or to, treat them with a lot of respect, like look after them. Their inherent value as a human being, so you're looking after people, but it's a lot deeper than that, much, much deeper. So here we go. So the loss of language really has its genesis in the dishonouring of the Treaty of Waitangi. And so back in 1990, the Bishop Verco was in Waitangi on February 6th, and the Queen of England was actually in the crowd at that time. And he read out this speech, and I'll read it to you now, because it kind of speaks to the heart of where things were at then, and I think where things are sometimes still at now. But he does finish off with the idea of it being, of hope at the end. He does still have hope. So anyway, I'll read it to you. So Bishop Verco, Anglican Bishop of Aotearoa of New Zealand at that time, and keeping in mind that the Queen of England is in the crowd as he's reading this out to everybody. Some of us have come here to celebrate, some to commemorate, some to commiserate, and some to remember what happened on the sacred ground. We come to the sacred ground because our tupuna left us this ground. 150 years ago, a compact was signed and a covenant was made between two people to give birth to a nation, a unique and unusual circumstance. Our tupuna said on this ground that the treaty was a compact between two people. Since the signing of the treaty 150 years ago, I want to remind our partner that you have marginalised us. You have not honoured the treaty. We have not honoured each other and the promises that we made on this sacred ground. Since 1840, the partner that has been marginalised is me. The language of this land is yours. The custom is yours. The media which we tell the world who we are yours. The needs and tastes of one partner is addressed in all our advertisements, and it makes me sad when we sing, "Give me a taste of kiwi with a lion red can." What I have come here for is to renew the ties that made us a nation in 1840. I don't want to debate the treaty. I don't want to renegotiate the treaty. I want the treaty to stand firmly as the means by which we are made one nation. The 1990 Commission has been bombarding me for 18 months about how I should behave, how I should celebrate and commemorate, and how I should do things. They did not tell by what process and why I do these things. But the treaty is what we are celebrating. It is what we are trying to establish. So my tino rangatiratanga is the same as your tino rangatiratanga. And so I have come to Waitangi to cry for the promises that you made and for the expectations of our tupuna that our tupuna had 150 years ago. As I look at the tranquil waters of Pewhairangi, as I remember the words that were spoken on this land, on this ground, as I remember the history of my people. So I come to the waters of Waitangi to weep for what could have been a unique document in the history of the world of Indigenous people against the Pākehā. And I still have the hope that we can do it. Let us sit and listen to one another. I want to say to the government, don't produce principles of the treaty is already there. As I remember the songs of this land, as I remember the history of this land, I weep here on the shores of the Bay of Islands. May God give us the courage to be honest with one another, to be sincere with one another, and above all, to love one another in the strength of God. And, I hear those words, and I just think to myself, those are still feelings that are experienced in this day right now. That was in 1990, so that's 32 years ago now that he said that. And we still have a long way to go, but when you think back in our history to where we have come to now, you can see that there has been change made. All the people that have stood up and said something and have actually made a stand and have put themselves at risk, like those young people, Ngā Tamatoa, they were seen as radicals. They were young. Some of them went on to be not necessarily disowned, but their families weren't happy with them for what they saw as bad behaviour. So they were getting it from both sides, from Te Ao Pākehā and sometimes from their own families for not behaving in a way at that time that was seen to be appropriate. But without those people who would stand up and who would declare that something wasn't okay and would stand by their thoughts publicly, not just behind closed doors, but actually stand up and say that to the nation, we wouldn't be here now. So I just really want to acknowledge those people. I just really want to acknowledge all of those, every single person that has along the way done something to help Te Reo Māori. There was Hinewehi Mohi that decided to sing our national anthem in Te Reo Māori, and she, it was the first time that it had ever been done, and when she did that, it created an uproar. It created a massive uproar, but nowadays that's normal. We sing the national anthem now in English and Te Reo Māori, sometimes Te Reo Māori first. So if she hadn't done that and been brave, because at that time it was brave, she actually didn't think much of it herself, but she got a lot of backlash for that. And even Bishop Verco, when he was up in Waitangi, the Queen in the crowd had spoken to the person next to her and said, "Is this a radical bishop?" And the person she was speaking to responded, "Well, no, not really, but he's doing a pretty good job." So, he wasn't a radical. He was just speaking from his heart. And so I think if we stand by what we believe is right, what we believe is a good thing, and for the right reasons as well, then we will see the blessings. It might not be straight away, and it might be 30 years later, it might be 50 years later, but as long as you've got the good, if you're guided well. And I really like the bishop's words, his final words around God's place in this journey. in this journey that we are on. So I just want to leave it there. And thank you. I've gone a bit over time. This morning, but yeah. Anyway, bless you all. I'll just end in a karakia, and then I hope you all have a good day. Okay, me noi tātou. Kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu kraiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, amene. Okay, ka kite everybody.